Welcome into the NASCAR Live Before Lock here, as we're here to get you ready for today's NASCAR race. Starts just a little over an hour from now. Green flag 3:05 p.m. East time. DraftKings right now still says lock is 3:20 p.m. East time, so we're gonna have to monitor that here a little bit here. Of course, got any questions here on the race? Be sure to line those up in the chat here on YouTube, or you can hit those over in Discord. We'll get to those questions as we do go throughout this show. Of course, we are sponsored by Prize Picks. We'll talk about some of those props over Prize Picks here later on in the show. Course, as always, here on NASCAR Live Before Lock show, I am joined by Chris Pennell. Chris, good afternoon. How you doing, man?
Doing well. I'm looking forward to the race today. We have lots of news to talk about coming up, so it should be an exciting and fun show here, and hopefully a good one for DFS as well.
I guess the first thing, let's just get the major news out, is that Kurt Busch, who was slated to start 10th, car was going to be in the back of the field. He is out of this race, concussion. So Ty Gibbs steps in. Ty Gibbs is not going to be in the player pool. So if you've already created lineups, get Kurt Busch out of your lineups, unless you want a big fat 0 on your score here. But that's really the big first news. And I know, looking at Bob's Twitter, Ty Gibbs, first time that he's driven in the next gen car. He was flown in last night or early this morning, I guess you would say, back to Pocono. He did do a driver simulator on this course. So, I mean, obviously that's the big news. We do have some drivers going to the back, including William Byron and Ross Chastain.
Yeah, I mean, definitely a lot of news to sift through today. Unfortunately enough for us, we don't have to make any changes to projections as far as Kurt Busch or Ty Gibbs is concerned, because they're just not going to accumulate points on this slate. And like you said, yeah, Ty Gibbs never in the next gen car before. Did the sim at like 1 a.m. He's only 19 years old, but this is definitely going to be a nice test run for Ty Gibbs. I mean, he's obviously got a future seat here at Joe Gibbs Racing, because I mean, he's in the family. So I'm excited to see what he can do today. He should have a fast car, but obviously that has nothing to do for DFS today. Several good drivers in the back, but not overly concerned about it once we talk about them.
I think it could be one of those things that it's analysis today to see what he looks like, in case we do maybe see him later on in the season get into a car. Something to just kind of look at there. In terms of the news on this one, of course, we're talking about roster construction, and we're always talking about Dominator versus place differential. And of course, 112 Dominator points are available here today, 160 laps. And for me, it's a one Dominator build. And we're going to talk about roster construction, because I actually brought up a question that came up for me when I was developing my head-to-head lineups here. But to me, one Dominator build. I did create a small group over in Cruncher in terms of, who that Dominators I wanted to be, but I wasn't trying to get to 2 Dominators.
Yeah, earlier in the week, and by early in the week, I mean yesterday, I was thinking maybe we can get a couple drivers starting inside the top 4. But once I actually started constructing lineups, I was really not liking the way those looked. I like pairing one of those drivers starting in the front 4 with Ross Chastain or some other place differential drivers a little bit more. So for me personally, I'm kind of agreeing with you as like a one Dom approach. But for the most part, I am doing this race as a finishing position type race. Yes, the place differential guys are nice, but there's not as many laps as we had in previous weeks. Like last weekend in New Hampshire, we had over 300 laps. So I was fine rostering multiple guys starting inside the top 5, because they can lead a bunch of laps and accumulate Dominator points. Not really the case today, because that's pretty much slashed in half at 160. So basically looking for drivers that I think can finish very well or have a little bit of PDF mixed in there too.
To me, where I thought in terms of constructing rosters, what made it tough for me was when I kind of started looking below Eric Jones. I mean, Eric Jones to me, cash play, and we'll talk about him a little bit later, but like to me is like, as you know, for our listeners that maybe they're hand building, like for me, I was hand building head-to-head lineups, is what that from Bubba Wallace on down, I was like, oh man, like it was a little bit of a struggle.
It really is. I mean, this is one of those weeks where all these cheap plays just don't look very good, especially a track like Pocono where you need horsepower, high speed. There's a reason these guys are cheap, because they're just not very good and not very fast. So while they do have some place differential upside, there's a good chance they probably finish right around where they're starting, unless there's a bunch of wrecks during the race, which I'm not totally expecting at Pocono. But we've been surprised a few times this year. But yeah, like you're saying, underneath Bubba Wallace, outside of some Keselowski and Austin Cindric and maybe Stenhouse, there is not much to like down there at all.
I was surprised how much Brad was coming up for me in crunches.
I think it's just because he's one of those drivers that has some PD down low that actually has the potential to crack the top 20, like legit top 20 upside. Was around 20th place in practice, and he did run well last week. So I think that's going to bump up his numbers a little bit just because of maybe potential recency bias that could look at his ownership as well. But I don't hate Keselowski because of the PD upside, but for me personally, I think that it could be a potential trap play, and Bubba Wallace and Cindric look a little bit better.
Now, one of the things that I know you do, you've got your spreadsheet that you have there. I have my spreadsheet out there. And one of the things that, literally the first column A is drivers. Column B to me is their team. Column C is car make. Right. And of course, that is something to talk about here a little bit today as we're constructing rosters of Toyotas and Chevys versus the Fords.
Yeah, watching practice, it's kind of what I expected heading into the weekend. It's a high-speed track like Pocono where you have long straightaways. The Toyotas and Chevys have definitely been a lot better than the Fords for most part this season, and that kind of translated in practice where you saw a lot of the Toyotas and Chevys qualify pretty well and showed some of the best practice speeds. And a lot of the Fords kind of struggle for the most part, like Ryan Blaney, who I pretty much think is the best Ford, or you can make a case for him or Joey Logano most weeks. But P28 in the one lap in practice for Blaney, P16 for Logano, and then Kevin Harvick, another guy that can contend that's in a Ford. He was P30 in practice, and a lot of their teammates are pretty slow as well. So Toyota and Chevy definitely seem to have the upper hand this weekend. And a lot of times we see this most weeks where there's a manufacturer that just misses and they're pretty bad during the race. So I'm not going to get away from the trends there.
Jay, I do see your question about Eric Jones. We'll get into that when we get into those mid-tier salaries. Of course, appreciate everyone tuning in here on Sunday for the NASCAR Live 4 Lock Show. Be sure to smash that thumbs up button. It really does help us out a ton. Hit that subscribe button. Hit that notification bell so you know when a show is live here on the channel. Of course, we got you covered all week long for all the DFS sports that are out there. Of course, the guys were on before us getting you ready for today's MLB slate. I'll be watching a little MLB and NASCAR this afternoon here in my home. Just kind of enjoying a Sunday for me, but let's get right into these top tier drivers. Let's be the drivers who are 9K and above over on DraftKings. And I always feel like we can kind of pair driver 1 and driver 2 here because they're starting first and second. First off, Kyle Busch, he's starting second, 10,600 on DraftKings, 14,000 on FanDuel. Denny Hamlin, he'll be on the pole. He is 10,400 DraftKings, 12,500 on FanDuel. And I know you brought up this point already on your show, is the fact of the pit stall difference between these two guys.
Yeah, I mean, once you look at it, these are basically the same two plays. So you're trying to find anything and anything little just to try to separate these guys. I think the pit stall selection could be the thing that makes or breaks it to where I either go with Kyle Busch or Denny Hamlin, because Denny Hamlin did fail tech a couple of times, which means he lost his pit stall selection. So I believe he's right behind Cody Ware for this race, or one of the junker cars. So doesn't have an open stall in front of him like we would normally see for a pole sitter. So Kyle Busch ended up getting the best pit stall. He's out front, obviously no one in front of him. So I think that could hurt Denny Hamlin once we get done with stage 1 and we get some pit stops. Because, if he loses that lead, there's no guarantee he's going to get it back. And Kyle Busch has had a great pit crew so far this year, and having the best pit stall is definitely going to help him. So, I mean, 2 of the best drivers at Pocono and 2 drivers that I think have a very strong chance to win today. But if you're trying to, split some hairs here, Kyle Busch has the slight edge for me. Plus, it's the M&M 400 race, and he's the M&M driver.
Yeah, you got to bring that narrative out there. I mean, look, I talked about it. The fact of what I did in constructing rosters was I did create a small dominator group. 2 of these guys were in that dominator group. Jake, by the way, Ty Gibbs is not in the player pool. And also should be noted, all of our tools and content over at Stokastic.com have been updated with Kurt Busch being out of this race. So if you are a Stokastic Plus member, everything has been updated over there to check that one out there. And to me, I personally favor Kyle Busch over Denny Hamlin, but I don't mind if you say, hey, I'm going to go with Denny.
No, I have no problem with that at all. I mean, he's the pole sitter, so there's a good chance he leads the good chunk of stage 1, if not all of it. But at the same time, I mean, Kyle Busch is right there with him. And then Chase Elliott's right there. He was super strong in practice. It's no guarantee that he's going to lead all of stage 1. And even then, stage 1's not that many laps. It's not like it's 100 laps where if you don't have Denny and he leads all of stage 1, it's game over for you. He could lead a large chunk of stage 1. And then if he finishes outside the top 5, I mean, it's not a guarantee that he's going to be optimal. So I'm going to go with Kyle Busch there, but it's very close.
And once say 30 laps is stage one, stage two,
Right.
65 laps, stage three, 65 laps. So that's a great point that you bring up there. Let's move on to the next driver here. We got Martin Truex Jr. He is starting 8th. He's 10-3 on DraftKings, 12,000 even over on FanDuel.
He's a little bit easier to get to over on FanDuel at that, I don't want to say cheap price point, because compared to some of these other drivers up top, it is kind of cheap, and he offers a little bit more PD upside from the other three that we're about to talk about with Elliott, Hamlin, and Kyle Busch. But it looks like Truex might go a little bit under the radar this weekend, and I think that would kind of be a mistake. I mean, he's a fine driver at Pocono, but I was looking at some of his speed numbers heading into this weekend. Once you remove super speedways, road courses, and some other tracks that don't really comp well to this weekend, no one has a better average green flag speed on the season than Martin Truex Jr. And starting in 8th, coming off a great week last week, and just couldn't get the win. And I know everyone talks about Ryan Blaney not having a win, but Martin Truex Jr. also doesn't have a win, and he's going to need one here at some point soon. And I could see it happening here at Pocono. So I like him a lot in tournaments. Not going to go there in cash games, but on both sides, he's a pretty high owned driver for me.
Next up, you got Chase Elliott. He is starting 3rd, 10-1 on DraftKings, 13-5 on FanDuel.
Yeah, Elliott's hard to bet against. He has not finished worse than 2nd, I believe, over the past month now. Like, he has just been an absolute fire. And that's not at just one track type. He is getting it done at road courses, super speedways, you name it. He is just killing it, and super impressive in practice. When you look at the 5 and 10 and 15 lap intervals, he basically had no fall off in his lap times, which is super impressive. So that's another reason why I don't think Denny Hamlin's a complete lock on this slate, even though he's on the pole, because Elliott looks like he's got the best long run car today. And who's to say that Elliott doesn't get up front at some point early on? So definitely like him a lot in tournaments. You can play him in cash games, but I'd personally side with Kyle Busch there.
Now we get into our first driver who has place differential, as Ross Chastain is starting 21st, 10,000 on DraftKings, 11,000 on FanDuel. Now he is going to the rear, which I do want to bring up something that we saw last week. Alex Bowman, who was chalk, he goes to the rear last week, wrecks out, first 10, 15 laps. I mean, it was very early on the race. And the thing that I was sitting on my couch and I'm watching the race, and the thing that chuckled me about it is they go to interview him, and I forget who was doing the interview, but Alex Bowman basically says, hey, when you go to the back, you get stuck with the crappy drivers.
That is 100% correct. I believe it was, it might have been Josh Bilicki, and then Ty Dillon were all involved, and obviously not the best drivers out there. And Alex Bowman didn't deserve a quick death like he had in the race last weekend. But yeah, that's the problem with going to the rear, because you have to hang out with guys like Cody Ware, Bilicki, BJ McLeod. But assuming that doesn't happen, like last weekend, Ross Chastain was the fastest car in practice yesterday, first in the 1 lap, first in the 5 lap. I personally think the Trackhouse cars are probably cheating somehow this year, and I want cheaters on my team. So give me all the Chastain. Obviously, his cup numbers at Pocono don't look great, but that was an inferior equipment. I think he has a win here in the Truck Series, I believe. But I mean, he's been arguably the best driver this year, and it's hard to bet against the raw speed that he's had.
Next up, we got a driver who is starting 4th. He got Kyle Larson, 9,800 DraftKings, 13,000 on FanDuel. The note that I wrote here on Kyle Larson was simply, is it a Kyle Larson week?
So there's a lot of times this year that it looks like it's going to be a Kyle Larson week, but he just does not have the absolute top end speed to get up front and dominate. I think he's going to run well during this race, and he should have won the Pocono race last year, but you got to keep in mind a lot of things have changed since then, and he has not been the old Kyle Larson. Obviously, his odds in Vegas to win this race are near the very top, and if you're looking at some of the numbers at similar tracks this year, and I hate to say similar, but it's the other high-speed tracks we've been at, 9th at Charlotte, 2nd at Kansas, 2nd at Vegas, and 1st at Auto Club. He's been finishing very well, and he's also been able to get up front at some point, but I just don't think he's going to have the raw speed over Elliott or the couple of Toyotas in front of him to dominate this race. There's a chance for it, but he is my lowest owned of all the high-end drivers we talked about so far.
Now we get to our first Ford driver on this slate, and it is Joey Logano, who's starting 14th, 9,600 on DraftKings, 10,500 on FanDuel.
Yeah, I noticed I was able to get him more on FanDuel because of the cheaper price point, and starting in 14th, it does make sense. You'd get to him a little bit, but again, I am not huge on the Fords here. 16th in the 1 lap in practice, which isn't awful. 9th in the 5 lap, but I mean, I'm going to have way more exposure on the drivers we already talked about. So I just can't get to that much Logano because of pricing issues. And I like a couple of the other drivers in the lower 9K range. So while I don't think Logano is the worst play out there, for my personal exposures, he's just someone I'm going to have to be underweight on just due to the fact that I'm higher on the other drivers.
Then you have Ryan Blaney, another Team Penske driver in a Ford. He's starting 6th, 9,400 DraftKings, 11,000 on FanDuel. And you brought up a great point yesterday on your show where you talked about the fact of, while he's got the points to get in the playoffs, he doesn't have the win. So he might have to sell out for a win at some point.
Yeah, the problem is, like, I'm not sure how he's going to do it today, because I just don't think the Fords have the raw speed, to compete with JGR, to compete with Hendrick up top. Ryan Blaney's obviously a great driver, and Pocono's, I believe, is the home for his first win ever in the Cup Series. And obviously he's got fine numbers here, and he's been fast overall. But I mean, starting in 6th for DFS purposes, I don't see him contending in the top 5 today. And he was P28 in the one lap in practice, obviously qualified much better. But for him to get up front, I think it's a pretty tall task today. I feel like he's going to run around 6th to 10th for the most part. And his price point, we're going to need some dominator points starting in 6, and I just don't see it happening. So I'm pretty low on Blaney and the Team Penske duo up top today.
Yeah, what's interesting to me is when you look at over what we have him as projection, how close it is to the top, to Kyle and Denny. I'm just like, I mean, I'd much rather get the Kyle and Denny than I would Ryan here.
I would too. I mean, sometimes you just have like if you're watching practice, like, it's not always going to show up in the numbers, but you can kind of tell when teams are struggling. And I do think the Fords are going to struggle comparatively to what we see from, like, the Chevys and the Toyotas for the most part. So while Blaine might not project as bad as we might talk about him, it's still one of those things where you got to take a stance, because you can't just be even on every single driver in the field. And the couple Fords up top are the ones that are going to kind of get the chopping block for me.
Another place differential driver is William Byron. He is going to the rear. He was going to start 18th, 9,200 on DraftKings, 10,000 on FanDuel.
Yeah, I think William Byron's a pretty solid play here. I hope him going to the rear is going to drop his ownership a little bit. I still think he's going to be high owned today, but starting in 18th, 13th in the one lap in practice, 7th in the 5 lap, also in a Hendrick car. And he's actually been pretty good at Pocono in his career, has 4 top 10s the past 6 races inside the top 15 each and every single time, and a couple top 5 mixed in there as well. And he's been pretty fast this year, just had a lot of bad luck where he wrecks out, but I think Byron's a pretty solid play starting in 18th.
Yeah, just wanted to look at William Byron's ownership. He's a popular play. Let's just say that popular play. He's one of those interesting plays here today. Then we got Kevin Harvick, who is at 9,000 on DraftKings, 9,200 over on FanDuel. He is starting 24th, and I mentioned about a dilemma I got into with head-to-head construction. I already had Kyle Busch in my construction. I was at that last driver in, and I want to say I had 9,800 left over. And so I was like, okay, you got Kyle Larson. Really don't want to go Logano. Didn't want to go to Blaney. Byron, okay, I wouldn't mind going there. But it was really a Harvick versus Larson question.
Yeah, I think in that scenario, like raw points wise, I would say Kyle Larson's the better play than Kevin Harvick. But you were talking about it where if you're building a head-to-head lineup, you already have Kyle Busch up top. He's starting in 2nd. Do you really want to pair him with Kyle Larson in a head-to-head build? If it was a tournament, sure, I think that's okay. Yeah. But if you're going head-to-head, you're trying to go a bit on the safer side there. And so I think pairing Busch with Harvick in that scenario would make more sense than going with Kyle Larson, even though Larson's a better projected play, in my opinion, today.
Personally, I love playing head-to-heads in NASCAR.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure it's pretty weak. I've never done it personally, but I would imagine the field's kind of weak with it.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's it's one of those things of like my general thoughts on head to head is like literally I use it more of just developing my bankroll, to where then I'm getting in these 20 max and 150 max and things along. That's how I use a head to head. It sometimes goes well. Like yesterday in MMA, it did not go well for me. My head to head lineup just did not go very well for me. But of course, we appreciate everyone tuned in here for the Stokastic NASCAR Live Before Lock shows. We're getting you ready here for today's M&Ms Fan Appreciation 400. And of course, you hear me talking about those data tools we have over at Stokastic.com. If you want to sign up right now, we've got a great offer going on for new users of Stokastic Plus, where you can save 50% off your first week of any Stokastic Plus pass. All you got to do is click the link in the video description, activate this offer, or you hit our join page and use that promo code NASCAR LBL, all caps, one word, NASCAR LBL, for 50% off your first week of any weekly package that we have. Say you want to get that NASCAR weekly package, head over right now, sign up right now, get 50% off your first week of any NASCAR package. Again, this is for new users only. And of course, Fantasy Cruncher is an add-on, is not included in our base packages, but can easily be added at checkout. Join Stokastic Plus today. And what I do is I pull up that top driver tool. It's got everything you need over there. And for me, like, and this is just kind of my core philosophy when I'm developing NASCAR lineups is like, if like for today, when it's a race, when, I'm looking to get a dominator, I'm looking at that top 2 dominator percentage. And that's where I'm using Fantasy Cruncher to basically help me develop some lineups, but also looking at that top 6 percentage and obviously ownership, whether we're talking about DraftKings or FanDuel. I mean, like there's some drivers that I will tell you I highlighted, like on FanDuel, I highlighted Ross Chastain's ownership, because he is going to be a chalk play over there on the FanDuel side of the equation. So that's just what I try to do in developing my lineups. And also it's like, if I'm playing in these large field tournaments, it's like, okay, where can I find leverage? Maybe there's a high-end driver, that you go, man, I really like that driver, but man, the field's just not getting to them. I mean, maybe it's a Martin Truex Jr. I mean, Martin Truex Jr., his ownership's a little lower than I would have expected. So maybe that's the guy today that you look at by looking at our tools and data over at Stokastic.com, and you say, okay, maybe Martin Truex Jr. is a guy I need to get to.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. Truex is one of my favorite tournament plays in the field today because, I mean, starting in 8th, he's got pretty similar upside to guys like Hamlin, Elliott, and Kyle Busch today, but that's not really reflecting in the ownership, and he starts a couple spots further back. So, I mean, I'm all aboard Truex. We talked about it. He's got some of the best speed rankings, if not the best speed ranking in NASCAR right now. Once you remove certain tracks, I think you should heading into this weekend. So I'm right there with you. I mean, you got to factor in the ownership, factor in all those tools, and then you kind of get the perfect recipe of what you want to do into the weekend.
Yeah. Like my guy, Pete, he put in, he says, I'm overexposed on Larson today. Let's see how this works out. I don't mind that because like, I just feel like at some point, Kyle Larson's going to have what we saw of Kyle Larson in 2021. Like it's going to happen at some point. And today you look at it, he's starting 4th. Right. Maybe today is that day.
It's certainly possible. I mean, I think it's either going to be a Hendrick car or a JGR car in victory lane today. I lean the Toyotas, but at $9,800, it's not like you have to go completely out of your way to play Kyle Larson. You can easily pair him with another top end driver. So I wouldn't be surprised if Larson had a solid race today. It's just so far this season, he's been in spots where it looks like he's going to crush it. And then he's just kind of mediocre to good, but not elite.
Ryan, I'm just kind of going through some questions on some general things here. He says, is leaving $500 okay for a FanDuel single entry? Look, I always think leaving money on the table for NASCAR is a good idea.
Yeah, especially over on FanDuel, their pricing was always a little bit weird. Like you can get Eric Jones at $6,000 on FanDuel. You can get like Cindric at $6,500. Like their pricing is not that tough today. So if you want to leave even $1,000 on the table on FanDuel, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I mean, it to me, it's always, of course, those week that we are a super speedway. Yeah,
right.
Leaving a ton of money on the table is what you want to do there. Let's move on to the mid-tier driver here. Let's start with Christopher Bell, the Joe Gibbs driver, 8,900 over on DraftKings, 9,500 on FanDuel, and he is starting 11th.
Yeah, I really like Christopher Bell today. He might be one of my favorite plays, if not my favorite play on the slate. Once you factor in the price point, I have a ton of him on both sites. I think he's my second highest owned driver on FanDuel, and he's top 5 over on DK. But starting in 11th, he got the win last weekend. He was super fast this week in practice, P2 in the 1 and 5 lap. And while his numbers at Pocono, it's a very small sample size. He had one pretty poor race and then one race where he got inside the top 5. But outside of his record auto club early this season, he's finished 5th, and 10th at intermediates. He's a Toyota. He's the cheapest JGR car. I mean, sign me up for Christopher Bell.
Now, when you talk about attempting to get leverage on the field, our next driver is someone that you could potentially get a little bit of leverage on the field, and that is Chase Briscoe, who is starting 13th. He's $8,700 on DraftKings, 7,000 on FanDuel, and they're just very small ownership.
Yeah, I think there's a good reason for that this weekend. He's one of those Fords where he was about P20 in practice. He qualified a bit high. His price on FanDuel makes it a little bit easier to get to him over there, but on DK, it's really tough for me to want to roster Briscoe. I did have Kurt Busch exposure. Obviously, that's gone. So if you want to filter some of that to Briscoe, I get it. But for me personally, I just up my Alex Bowman and up to my Christopher Bell when I get rid of my Kurt Busch. I'm not a huge fan of Chase Briscoe today.
Of course, to mention Kurt Busch is out of this race. Ty Gibbs will be in his car. Ty Gibbs is not a part of the player pool. So let's move on to the next driver. That'll be Tyler Reddick, who is starting 16th, 8,300 on DraftKings, 8,500 on FanDuel.
Yeah, Reddick was a guy that did benefit from some of my Kurt Busch exposure being gone because I was planning on playing around 15% Kurt Busch. So it kind of filtered out to some of these AK drivers. And Tyler Reddick was top 10 in practice. He's starting P16, so he got some PD upside there. I, I kind of wish he hasn't won already, because there'd be more motivation for him to just completely come out and just, not really dominate the race, but go for a top 5 and potentially try to get a win. But when he's not wrecking and having issues, he finished 6th at Charlotte instead of at Las Vegas. So he's a fine tournament play for me, but I'm not going to get there in cash.
The driver starting one position behind him is Alex Bowman, who is 8,100 on DraftKings, 8,800 on FanDuel.
Yeah, I like Bowman quite a bit. I feel like it's been a while since he's had a good race, and obviously he was a victim of the Ty Dillon or whoever it was fiasco last weekend early on. But starting in 17th, he's pretty cheap for a Hendrick car, only $8,100. Intermediates, he's finished 10th, 9th, and 1st outside of a 25th place finish at Auto Club, but he didn't have a bad car in practice, showed top 10 speeds, and starting at 17th makes him playable, and he won at Pocono last year. Got lucky with Kyle Larson losing a tire at the end, but still was in a position to win.
Daniel Suarez is starting 9th today, 7,900 on DraftKings, 8,000 on FanDuel. You mentioned about the Trackhouse guys a little bit earlier, so the other Trackhouse racer here.
Yeah, I mean, I like Daniel Suarez a lot for tournaments. He's starting inside the top 10, so it should keep his ownership down. But he was P3 in practice, and I don't know, they just got extra juice in those cars. I'm not sure what it is, but the last time we were in intermediate, he just ripped through the field twice. He even got a penalty and came right back up. They have tons of speed everywhere, so I'm all aboard Daniel Suarez, and hopefully some lower ownership today.
Eric Amarola is starting 12th today, 7,800 on both slates.
Yeah, not huge on Eric Amarola. He's just one of those Fords, and Stuart Haas was pretty slow in general, starting a little bit too high for me. I think he got qualified where he's going to finish, so pretty low on him overall.
Eric Jones, who obviously is going to be a very popular play today, he is starting 34, 7,600 on DraftKings, 6,000 on FanDuel. And I mean, look, from a cash games perspective, tough to avoid Eric Jones here today. But someone asked in chat earlier about how much is too much Eric Jones in terms of GPPs.
So I'll be honest, in my 3 max build, I played him in every single lineup. I'll go down with the ship. If he wrecks, he wrecks. But if he doesn't, there's a good chance he's probably going to be optimal, if not close to it. And that's not to say I faded all the other 7K drivers. I was still able to filter in guys like Bowman, Suarez, and I think I got a little bit of Austin Cindric mixed in there and Bubba Wallace. But Jones is he was fast in practice, P6 in the 1 lap, P4 in the 5 lap. A lot of times we'll see drivers that qualified poorly because they practiced poorly. But this was just a situation where Eric Jones ended up kissing the wall in practice and qualifying, so it slowed his lap down. But I mean, if that doesn't happen, we probably see Eric Jones qualify a lot better than this. We'd be talking about him as a good tournament play, but with the issue in qualifying, he just turns into the smash chalk of the week.
Bubba Wallace is starting 7th today, where he is 7,500 on both DraftKings and FanDuel.
Yeah, kind of a similar play to last week where he started high, so people aren't going to want to be on him too much, but he was able to hold his ground and he was very fast during the race. And I like all the Toyotas. And he always tends to be the forgotten about Toyota, but if you like Toyota, you can't forget about Bubba Wallace. And he was decently fast in practice, was P12 in the 1 lap, but did have a top 5 finish at Pocono last year, and he's got top 10 upside today.
Brad Keselowski, he is starting 26 today, 7,300 on DraftKings, 7,200 on FanDuel. And he was one of my popular drivers when I was doing my crunch.
Yeah, I'm going to assume it's basically just because he's starting in 26. And if you're looking at some of these other drivers down here, they don't offer either as much P upside, or they're just guys like Cole Custer or Justin Haley, which aren't that impressive to get to. But Keselowski's okay. I mean, he was P22 in the 1 lap in practice. I think he's going to gain spots today. But he does feel like one of those drivers that could be a potential trap play. And I personally do have more Bubba Wallace and Austin Cindric, who we're about to talk about.
Of course, Austin Cindric, he is starting 20th, 7,200 on DraftKings, 6,500 on FanDuel.
Yeah, I believe Austin Cindric actually has a victory at Pocono in lower level series before. Obviously, he was a great Xfinity driver. Starting in 20th, though, actually wasn't super slow in practice for being a Ford, was 15th in the 1 lap and 12th in the 5 lap. And over the past, I believe, month or so now, I mean, Austin Cindric has one of the best average finishes of all drivers. He's been running very, very well.
Next up, you got Austin Dillon. He is starting 15, 7,000 on DraftKings, 5,800 on FanDuel.
Yeah, not a big fan of Austin Dillon today. I feel like he's the same play as Ricky Stenhouse, but just a little bit more expensive and starting a few spots further up. So while Austin Dillon has some pretty solid finishes, I just don't love getting to a bunch of him today.
Then you got Chris Buescher, who is starting 5th today, 6,800 on DraftKings, 5,500 on FanDuel.
So it's a little bit scary to say you don't like Chris Buescher, because he's definitely had some pretty solid races like Michael McDowell in recent weeks. But starting at 5th, can you really picture that he's going to hold off Hendrick today? He's going to hold off the JJR cars. I personally see him falling back. And even if he does, it's if he finishes top 12, that's a good day for Chris Buescher, but that's not going to be a good day for DFS purposes starting in 5th. And he's kind of more expensive than he has been as well.
Ricky Stenhouse Jr. starting 19th today. He's 6,600 on DraftKings, 6,200 on FanDuel.
Yeah, Ricky Stenhouse Jr., he's a guy that I'm actually getting to a little bit today. And I've been avoiding him at the short flat tracks, but now we're at a large flat track, and that's not really comparable to the ones we've been at this year. And he actually showed me some speed. Like, he typically qualifies in the late 20s and finishes in the late 20s. But this week, I mean, P19, but it was P19 in the 1 lap in practice. It was also top 10 in the 5 lap. I think we actually have some top 15 upside of Ricky this weekend. Showed a little bit more life and speed. So I don't hate him in any format today.
Michael McDowell is starting 25th today, 6,500 on DraftKings, 5,200 on FanDuel.
Yeah, McDowell is about a 20th place car in practice. I feel like it's right around where he's going to finish. If you wanted to go McDowell over Stenhouse in cash games, I'd understand that because you get 6 more place differential spots. But I do think Stenhouse has more top 15 upside than Michael McDowell does. But McDowell's obviously been racing very well, but didn't really show a ton of speed for me. I feel like he's going to be about a 20th place car, really.
Cole Custer is starting 32nd today, 6,300 on DraftKings, 5,000 on FanDuel.
Yeah, Custer is going to be a popular play to fit in some of the studs up top. And I'll tell you right now, it's pretty terrifying because Custer is awful. Like, I hate rostering Cole Custer. He's one of my least favorite drivers, if not my least favorite driver. But the problem is we do not have many good cheap plays this weekend. So I find myself getting to some Cole Custer. He's definitely a viable cash game play, but in my 3 max, now, people are going to jam him in 2 or 3 other lineups, and 3, I'd rather just get to 1 or 0 personally and just pivot to like a Haley just for lower ownership or something.
Speaking of Justin Haley, he's next up starting 30th. He is $200 cheaper than Custer on both sides. He's 6,100 on DraftKings, 4,800 on FanDuel.
Yeah, I want to make a better case for Haley over Custer. Really, the only thing I can say is lower ownership, and they're just about the same play. But Haley wasn't much faster than Custer in practice. He was P32 in practice, and Cole Custer was P33. So it's not like we're getting too much of a difference here. And the Vegas odds do side with Cole Custer. They're like, again, in cash, it's Custer for me. In tournaments, Haley be a little bit lower owned, so he's a fine pivot.
And the final driver in this here is Harrison Burton. He is 6,000 on DraftKings, 3,000 on FanDuel, and he is starting 28th.
And he should be lower owned than the 2 we talked about. So if you want to get even more off the chalk, Harrison Burton actually showed a little bit of speed in practice, was P23 in the 1 lap and a little bit better than the 5 lap. The only thing I worry about is maybe a rookie at Pocono, but again, it's a lower ownership play. I don't like him as much as Custer or Haley, but the ownership will be lower.
Of course, appreciate everyone tuning in here for the NASCAR Live Before Lock show, and we are sponsored by Prize Picks. Got to head over to Prize Picks, play their daily prop-based contest, and they have got a great offer for everyone tuning in here. When you sign up today at Prize Picks, be sure to use that promo code OSMOS. They got an instant first match deposit of up to $100. Very simple. Deposit $100, they give you $100. If you only put $50 in, they give you 50. And looking at over these props over here today, I know Chase Elliott, the fantasy score, is a score you've liked, and this number just continues to rise. As I will tell you, Chris sent me the play over last night. That at that point it was 41.5, which I think previously it was 39.5. It is now 43.5.
And they just got the number wrong. I'm not sure why it was so low. Like when I saw 39.5, I mean, that was kind of a joke. I mean, there's a good chance he could potentially win this race. He can get up front and dominate. And if he does that, he's going to score 50 plus points today. 39.5 was crazy. You said 43.5 now that we're at.
Yeah.
Even then, that seems low. I would be like, I believe Kyle Busch and Denny Hamlin are still at 50.5. So I think he should be pretty close to where those two are sitting. And the fact that he's that much lower just honestly does not make too much sense to me. So at 43.5, he's got to finish better than second place, but you have to factor in he's going to get some dominator points mixed in that could make that more so of a top 5 rather than the top 2. And I mean, obviously he could very well win this race. So I think the number is just too low in Elliott today.
Kyle Busch 50.5. I know you like that over as well.
Yeah, that was basically just me betting on him winning the race. I just a big buyer into this M&M narrative. Obviously, even if he wasn't in the M&M car, it's hard not to like Kyle Busch at Pocono. He's one of the best, if not the best driver here over the past many seasons now. He's been great so far this year, tons of speed. It's basically just a bet to win on him.
The other prop that you mentioned to me that you like here is the under 12.5 cars passed for Kevin Harvick.
Yeah, I thought that number was just juiced up a little bit. I mean, we're basically banking on a top 11, top 12 finish there. And while his average finishes would indicate he can do that, his average running position this year is right around 16th to 17th place. at the intermediates. He's just been kind of getting lucky with not wrecking out, which is no fault to him. That's fine, avoiding wrecks. But if that doesn't happen, this is a pretty green race and the Fords aren't as fast like they were in practice. There's a strong chance we kind of see Kevin Harvick riding around 15th place, if not a little bit worse than that.
And I know you've talked about this when you're playing NASCAR over at Prize Picks. Take that flex pay. Yes. Don't do the power play just because of, I mean, look, a wreck can happen. Various things can happen. That's why on the NASCAR side of thing, that flex pay. I mean, yeah, I mean, look, you want to chase that 5X, chase the 5X, but the smarter play is to go with that flex play.
Yeah, I mean, it's all fine and dandy. Then there's 3 laps left and someone blows a tire. Then you really wish you would have done that flex play because we can't project that. We just can't.
No, you definitely cannot project that over there. Of course, we got the lower tier drivers to break down here, and then we will get into your listener questions. So be sure to start lining up those questions. First driver we'll mention here is Ty Dillon, starting 27th. He's 5,800 on DraftKings, but the bare minimum 2,000 on FanDuel.
Yeah, FanDuel's not going to trick me into it, though, even though it's the bare minimum. I just don't typically go there in FanDuel. I mean, yeah, he allows you to do whatever you want, but I just don't see the need to do that. I mean, most of my lineups, the cheapest driver is Eric Jones or Eric Jones, and I don't really need to go much lower. I still like my lineup a lot. But as far as DraftKings is concerned, he's just one of those drivers that's typically always slow, starts near the back, and at this price point, if he doesn't wreck, he probably gains some spots, but it's not as enticing as usual because he's usually in the 30s and now he's 27. So the upside's kind of zapped a little bit.
Then you got Noah Gragson. He is starting 22nd, 5,600 on DraftKings, 4,000 on FanDuel.
Yeah, I could see him getting some ownership just because people like his, his character, or he's a wild guy. If you ever pay attention to any Xfinity, which I don't much of, but I still hear about him on Twitter if that tells you anything. But filling into the 16 car this weekend, if you're looking at the practice numbers, I mean, P31 and P18 in the 5 laps, starting in 22nd. I have some just because I don't think he's the worst driver out there and the equipment's not awful, but he's kind of starting right around where I'd hope he'd finish and not much upside there.
Corey LaJoie is starting 23rd, 5,500 on DraftKings, 4,500 over on FanDuel.
Yeah, pretty much a similar play to Noah Gragson. I just don't think that car is going to have as much speed. Corey LaJoie did win me a tournament at Pocono a couple years ago, but times have changed. LaJoie is a guy that you're hoping for a top 25, and starting inside the top 25, you're probably only going to move back.
Todd Gilliland, he is starting 29th, 5,300 on DraftKings, 2,500 on FanDuel.
Yeah, of all the punts we've talked about so far in this low 5K range, he's the one I'm probably going to get to the most of just because he's starting the furthest back. And it's really as simple as that. I don't think he's going to be good during the race. I don't think he's going to be fast. But if you're starting the furthest back, maybe some guys wreck out and you gain some spots. That's about it.
That honestly, drivers wrecking out would probably be the one reason to potentially roster Cody Ware. I'm not going there. He's starting 36, 5,100 on DraftKings, 3,000 on FanDuel.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm going to play one scrub, like scrub, like the Bulickies of the world, Cody Ware is the one I'll get to. He's starting dead last and his practice time wasn't awful, but again, it's a situation where I'm playing 3% of him this week compared to 0%.
These are, I mean, like this is almost like the drivers that Alex Bowman was talking about last week when he wrecked out of who you're going to be racing with there at the beginning of the race. JJ Yelly, he's starting 33rd, 5,000 on DraftKings, 4,800 on FanDuel.
Yeah, I honestly just X these guys out, the ones we're at to talk about.
Yes, I like in terms of this under 6,000,
right?
Outside of Dylan and probably Gillen, I don't want to get to any of them.
I don't either. I have sprinkles of Gragson and LaJoie, but it's not like I feel good about it. It's just because they're there. I don't want to play 20% Ty Dillon.
Yeah, you definitely don't want to get there. Now, if we look at the betting side of the equation here, Kyle Busch and Denny Hamlin are the favorites to win this race. They're at plus 500. And I was just kind of looking at some of the prop bets that are out there.
Right.
And I think this kind of alludes to a point that you've talked about why favoring the Toyotas and the Chevys are what you want to favor here today. As you look at the race winning manufacturer, Chevy plus 110, Toyota plus 130, Ford plus 500. So I think it kind of tells you the way the betting side of this thing sticks out there. I mean, look, if you want to go crazy and you think Ty Gibbs is going to shock the world here, come in on the day of the race and win. He's plus 3,000. But I mean, I think to me, I'm looking at these top three guys and maybe even throw Kyle Larson in there. Larson's plus 600, Elliott plus 550, Hamlin plus 500, and Kyle Busch is plus 500.
Yeah, I do have a hard time seeing that like a top dog not win the race. I think maybe a potential long shot, and by long shot, it's not really that long, but Christopher Bell at plus 1,500 last time I looked. I mean, I just can't see anybody else. I mean, you could take a chance on a Suarez, a chance on a Bubba Wallace, but even then you're not getting the best odds out there. For me personally, though, I do think it's going to be a JGR car at Kyle Busch, a Denny Hamlin, or Martin Truex. And if you're looking for a first-time winner, Truex definitely has the best odds between those three.
Of course, if you got any questions, you can line those up in the YouTube chat. You can also put those over in Discord. If you do that over in Discord, if you can just tag me, that does help me out a lot of seeing those picks over there. I'll mention Mr. Moneybags. So I'll mention him. He's got one in Discord. He says, I love me some Chase Elliott and Kyle Busch today. Is it a bad idea to play them in the same DK GPP lineup with them starting 2 and 3?
It's not my favorite route to go today. When I was doing some 3-max builds, I did not personally do that. I either paired one of them with either Ross Chastain or William Byron. That's the way I went. It can work out. If Ross Chastain or William Byron have issues moving through the field since they're dropping to the rear, that can work, but I don't think it's the most optimal way to build because there's so few laps. If this was a 300-lap race, I'm all for that. I did it last week. I played a bunch of Truex and Elliott starting 1-2. This isn't really one of my favorite weeks to do that kind of type of build.
Logan asking says, who's a good pivot from Custer? And if you were to fade one driver starting in the top 5, who would it be?
I'll start with the second question first. It would probably have to be Kyle Larson for me, just because he's the one guy that's shown this year where it's been hard for him to be able to get up front and dominate rather than the other guys. And a pivot off of Cole Custer, really, there's a bunch of them down there. I mean, there's McDowell, Stenhouse, Justin Haley, Harrison Burton. The guy I had the most of all those drivers I just mentioned were Ricky Stenhouse. He's a little bit more expensive, but if you can find the extra $300, I mean, Custer, you're probably hoping for a top 30 today. Meanwhile, Stenhouse, I think, has top 15 upside.
Throw some super chats we got in there. Always appreciate those. Eddie saying best 2 pay ups on DraftKings GPP and best 2 values.
So if it's a GPP, overall, I would say Kyle Busch, Chastain. I would go with Truex and Chastain if it's going to be a tournament. I'm going to eat the Chastain chalk, but you can go with Truex to get off of some of the chalk up top. I think he's a pretty solid tournament play today. And favorite cheapie was the next question?
Yeah, top 2 values.
For me, it's gross. Cole Custer just right as the best value for me. and then Ricky Stenhouse Jr. I mean, that's not 2 guys that I feel ever comfortable playing, but they do great at the best.
My fellow Ark, appreciate you in the super chat. Says Chastain, Haley, and Chase Elliott. Is that a good GPP lineup?
Chastain, Elliott, and who's the other one?
Justin Haley.
I don't have anything against those drivers. I mean, it makes sense to have Elliott and Chastain together. Then Haley's just down low, so it's fine.
Yeah, I mean, look, you gotta find somebody down low that you like there. Of course, as always, appreciate those super chats there. Let's see here. Would you prioritize finishing position over differential points today?
It's kind of different because I have a mixture of both of my lineups. Like for an example, I do think going with finishing position over some drivers makes sense. Like when I'm looking at some of these salaries here, you have Bubba Wallace, $7,500 starting in 7th. Then you have Keselowski starting in 26th. In that scenario, I'm going to go with Bubba Wallace there. I think he's going to have more speed during this race, and I think he's got a decent chance of finishing inside the top 8, top 10. Well, meanwhile, Keselowski, while the PD is there, it could be a bit trappy where he just finishes right around 20th place. And at the same time, I look at something like Denny Hamlin starting in 1st, or I'm looking at Ross Chastain starting in 21st. I'm rather getting to Chastain in that scenario. So it's not just it's hard to answer just simply like that. It comes down to driver versus driver, really.
Should note DraftKings has changed lock time to 3:03 p.m. Eastern time. So something to kind of think about there as you start putting your lineups in together. Fly Steeman asks Bubba or Ricky Stenhouse Jr.
I'll go with Bubba Wallace there. It seems like the Toyotas are going to be fast today. So I know Ricky's got a lot more PD upside, but I think Bubba's got honestly a chance to finish inside the top 6, top 8 today.
course, would love to see you go into the Stokastic Hall of Fame today. Of course, what you got to be doing, you got to be rocking that Stokastic avatar on your DFS profile. You can get that over to stokastic.com/avatar. Tweet your wins to @Stokastic HOF. You'll win a free month of Stokastic plus Platinum when you finish in the top 3 of a contest with over 5,000 contestants. Of course, only one free month can be awarded to a user per calendar year, as kudos to Bob there, taking out over $37,000 playing there in MLB. Awesome. Kudos to you. What you're able to do, taking 7 entries, winning $37,000. Kudos to you there. Next up, Mark taking down first place over there in a MLB contest as he took down the mini max there, taking home on $1,500. Kudos to you. Also, Dave takes down a contest over there, an MLB showdown contest, winning $1,000. Also, Jason J187 winning $20,000 over there on FanDuel. Kudos to you. And then Steve Buzzard and Alex both taking down contests there, finishing first and second. So kudos to everyone that's going to the Arsenal Hall of Fame over the past couple of days. Love to see you go into the Arsenal Hall of Fame here later on today. Of course, we got just under 15 minutes here left in the show to answer any questions you have here on today's NASCAR race. Next question. Jake says, sucks Gibbs is in the player pool. I legit think he has top 5 potential.
Top 5 for your first cup race might be a bit much for me, but if he finished in the top 10, top 15, I wouldn't be surprised. He's obviously a very talented driver, and he has a seat waiting for him whenever he's ready for the Cup Series. He's still only 19 years old, but I mean, he's in a good car today, 45 car, basically the 5th JGR. I mean, I don't think he's going to suck by any means, but top 5, I think, is pushing it.
And has never raced a next gen car. I think that's got to be part of the equation too when thinking about that one.
Exactly.
Jim says, hey guys, I have a line with Hamlin, Elliott, Bell, Suarez, Jones, and Cody Ware.
Oh.
Jim, I appreciate it, man, but I can understand with that lineup he's presenting: Denny Hamlin, Chase Elliott, Christopher Bell, Daniel Suarez, Eric Jones. Okay, I get that. And of course, then you have to dumpster dive to get to Cody Ware. I mean, like, I would say that, Jim, the what you're hoping for is a bunch of wrecks, and that Cody's not in those wrecks.
Right. It's just so tough to want to roster Cody Ware. I mean, if you're looking at the upside for him, it's probably, like, I know he showed some speed in practice, but he's not going to be passing some of these drivers that are starting in front of him. Obviously, he's in the back, so he's going to pass a couple of these guys. I think he passes McLeod. I think he passes Bilicki and Yaley. But after that, I don't see him gaining any more spots outside of Rex. And I mean, at some point, there's going to be drivers that come out of the race. It's not now, if it's not a big one, you're only going to lose a couple. So even then, a few spots gained from him aren't going to be enough to put him in the optimal lineup when drivers that are just a little bit more expensive than him, like Harrison Burton, Justin Haley, I mean, a little bit more expensive than him, but, cheaper drivers. It's just the path for him to be optimal is you basically need a wreck fest. And that's really, to put it simply.
Logan mentions, goes, would you be over the field on Truex or Elliott in a GPP? I would be over the field on Truex.
Yeah, I think Truex is a little bit easier to get overweight on as well. And I mean, they're both fantastic plays, but if you're just hunting for low ownership, Truex is in a pretty good spot today.
Yeah. Let me find. Okay, this is Jay. He says, how popular is the lineup going to be of Elliott, Larson, Jones, Ross, Haley, Custer, single entry? In terms of my thought process for today, I would think that would not be a popular entry, because you're going with a 2 dominator build of Elliott and Larson. So for me, I would think that would not be a popular play, but I could see where Haley and Custer do get a lot of ownership in a single entry.
Yeah, I think the drivers he has in his lineup are pretty chalky, but at the same time, I don't think a ton of people are going to go with the Larson Elliott combination together. Yeah. I think people are going to do it, but it's not going to be nearly as much as an Elliott with the Chastain combination or something like that. So I think it's still fine to play in a tournament.
In a bubble, Truex Jr., Elliott, or Chastain. I'm gotta imagine that means you're saying pick one. I like Chastain today, but like, to me, if you were saying, if you're going to start your lineup with building a dominator, I'd probably go with Chase Elliott. If that would be for me.
Yes, if you need to dominate in your lineup, Chase Elliott's obviously going to be one of the top options for that. But in a vacuum, just looking at raw projections, Chastain will grade out the best for me there.
Thoughts on Tyler Reddick?
Reddick's the guy where he projects well for me. I think he's in a good spot. His price isn't that hard, but I'm not going my way to roster him. He still looks like he has top 10 speed according to practice. So I have close to 20% of him today, but it's kind of a quiet 20%. Like he's not one of those drivers I'm really trying to go my way to roster.
Is there any strategy to avoid wrecks? Completely unpredictable, but mid-pack stacks, maybe.
I wish there was. If there was a strategy to avoid wrecks, I think I'd be living on an island. So, unfortunately, no.
Just look at last week with Bowman and Dillon. I mean, they were two popular plays that you wanted to get to, and literally the first quarter of the race, they're both out of the race.
Right, and there's just no way of knowing that's going to happen, unfortunately.
Yeah. Who should be a lock for a 3 max entry on DraftKings? Well, if you listen to what Chris said a little earlier, it's Eric Jones for him.
Yeah, I put him in all 3 lineups. If he wrecks, whatever. He should be high owned enough where at least I can maybe potentially min cash with Eric Jones. But if he doesn't wreck today, I mean, there's a good chance he's inside the top 20 and he's crushing it on DK.
Is using Brad in cash a bad idea?
It's not the worst driver you could go with in cash today. Once you get to that lower 7K to 6K range, you got some pretty bad plays down there. So I'm okay with it.
Yeah. Bush or Elliott in a 3 max?
Slightly into Kyle Busch, very slight. They're both basically the same play in my opinion, but I do think Kyle Busch can win this race.
Thoughts on Michael McDowell?
Michael McDowell is a decently safe play today. You're basically hoping for a top 20 practice indicated, top 21 speeds. Not in love with him, but I mean, he's just kind of there. And I have around 15%.
Is fading Kyle Busch a 20 max okay to do?
I mean, you can always fade whoever you want for tournaments, but it's not something I would recommend doing. I mean, there's a decent chance he wins this race. And if you don't have him in any lineups, you're going to be dead.
Yeah. Busch or Hamlin last in on DraftKings?
Busch or Hamlin is the question?
Yeah, that's I feel like you can't go either way. I'm guessing that what Dustin did here is he built the rest of his lineup. And then he said, okay, I'm saving a dominator for the last spot in.
Okay. I mean, for me, it's pretty easily Hamlin in that scenario for sure.
Yeah. Let's see here. Here goes down your narrative streak.
Okay, let's see.
Kudos to Connor here. He goes, to add to your M&M's narrative, Mars's U.S. headquarters is in Hackett'sville, New Jersey, and lots of employees will be there.
Oh, perfect. I'm all for more narrative talk.
Well, look, with the sponsor, with the race sponsor, of course, they're going to have a ton of people there. They're their race sponsor. DraftKings single entry GPP. Is Elliott and Truex in the same lineup okay?
I think it's more okay than having like an Elliott Busch because at least Truex is starting in 8th place. So I'm okay with that.
Logan would like to know, who are you over the field on, and who is one guy you're under the field or fading?
I know for a fact I'm under the field on Kevin Harvick today, and I'm also under on guys like Brad Keselowski, and I'm under on some of the Penske, the Penske duo of Joey Logano and Ryan Blaney. I'm overweight on Ross Chastain, overweight on Jones, should be overweight on Daniel Suarez as well, and Bubba Wallace.
What do you think of Harvick for cash? Fading him in term is for me, but scared of high cash ownership and him finishing 10th.
Yeah, I think in cash games, it's fine. Like, you're not trying to be the smartest guy in the room in cash games. If you land on him, I don't think he's a must play in cash. I personally prefer Bell, but I don't think the ownership will reflect that in cash games. But I'm with you on the tournament fade.
Yeah. Of course, be sure to check out that poll. What's your favorite M&Ms? It's been a while since I had some M&Ms. I was always kind of a peanut guy.
Oh, I like the peanut butter ones. Those are good.
Okay. All right. Let's see.
Perfect.
Is Jones the best value play for FanDuel?
Oh yeah, I'm FanDuel. I just did my FanDuel, just got it done in time at the buzzer. But I had 30% Eric Jones, which it's by far the cheapest driver that's high up in my exposures. So he's definitely the best value.
Last driver, 9,200 left on FanDuel. Who are you taking a shot on?
9,800 below.
9,200.
9,200 below. I would probably, it would have been Kurt Busch. Unfortunately, he's no longer there for us. It's going to be Daniel Suarez or Alex Bowman for me. I have more Daniel Suarez personally.
By the way, Vince says Bowman or Suarez.
Just as we talk about it. If it's a tournament, I would lean Daniel Suarez there.
Yeah. Jake says, he goes, I've got a lineup with Gregson and Burton with all the other top drivers I wanted to get to. I'm looking at my head-to-head lineup, and I'm kind of in a similar position of like, God, do I really want to dumpster dive for two of these guys?
I don't have any lineups like that, at least in a 3 max. In 150,
Yeah.
I'm sure they start to get filtered in there. But if I'm hand building or doing a 3 max, I don't feel that great about having a double punt. Like, I'm okay with having 2 6K drivers like a Custer or the Stenhouse. But once we get to like Ty Dillon and Burton together, it doesn't feel good.
Kevin says, he goes, is it okay that my best player is Ross Chastain and no going lower than Eric Jones on a DraftKings GPP?
It sounds pretty good to me. It sounds nice and balanced. I mean, Chastain's pretty much the best play on the slate today. So I don't think you're doing a bad thing with that kind of construction.
Yeah. Let's see here. Last man in on FanDuel, Stenhouse or Jones?
It's Jones easily for me. Similar finishing position upside. Jones was faster and he's starting further back.
Thoughts on Corey LaJoy?
Probably going to be pretty slow battling for a top 25. He's starting inside the top 25. I think he only loses spots today.
Be sure to smash that thumbs up button. Let's get over 100 likes before we get out of here. We'd really do appreciate that. Of course, if you're not subscribed to Stokastic right here on YouTube, do that. Hit that notification bell so you know the show is live here on the channel. Let's see here. Stenhouse or McDowell? I feel like I feel like that's a pretty easy answer. Stenhouse, right?
Yeah, Stenhouse has the higher finishing position upside, in my opinion.
Burton or Dillon for a FanDuel GPP?
Ooh, over on I think Harrison Burton can finish higher than Ty Dillon, so I'm going to go with Burton on FanDuel.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think that when you're building some of these lineups, I think one of the biggest questions when you're going down, you know, say you're going below 7,000, it's like, okay, do I want to get to Cole Custer? I mean, he starts 32nd. Okay. But then maybe do you look at like a guy like a Stenhouse starting 19th of having that better top 15 finishing potential?
Yeah, that's definitely what I'm doing today. Like, yeah, you have guys like Custer, like Haley that have that massive PD, but I mean, if they finish 25th and compared to a Stenhouse that could potentially battle for a top 12, top 15, I'd rather be the Stenhouse there, especially in tournaments.
I love this question here. 3 worst plays, not in the dumpster bottom tier.
3 worst. Well, I'm going to look up my exposures here. So I barely have any Almirola, barely any Busher, and barely any Ryan Blaney. Ryan Blaney and Joey Logano are pretty low for me as well.
I was wondering if you were maybe going to say Chase Briscoe.
They're not. Oh, actually, I guess I have 0 Chase Briscoe because he didn't even pop in my exposures. Yeah, no Chase Briscoe.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things of like when you're looking over our ownership projections over at Stokastic. That's one of the things I do highlight is I'll highlight who are we projecting underneath 10%, and then kind of going, okay. Like I remember earlier this year that the race Austin Cindric won. I mean, he had very low ownership, but I think in that race maybe he was starting at the top of the, like he was maybe starting in the top 5 or something like that.
Yeah,
and that's why. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Hamlin or Chastain FanDuel GPP?
Hamlin or Chastain. I love Chastain on FanDuel. He's my highest on driver over there.
Yeah. The one thing on the DraftKings side of that equation, it's, well, what if Hamlin just leads so many, just racks up so many dominator points, but definitely love Chastain today.
Yeah, if Hamlin does lead like a large chunk of this race and finishes top 5, he will be a better play than Chastain, assuming Chastain doesn't do something similar where he leads a lot of laps. So there's definitely a path, but it's a tougher path for Hamlin.
Of course, appreciate everyone tuning in here for NASCAR Live Before Lock. Huge thank to our sponsor, Prize Picks. Be sure to check them out. Use that promo code AWESOME when you sign over there at prizepicks.com, or, of course, you can download their app in the App Store. They got instant first match deposit of up to $100. That's going to do it for today's NASCAR Live Before Lock show. Look forward to checking out this race here today. Appreciate you tuning in, and we will talk to you next week right here on the NASCAR Live Before Lock show. Have a good day, everybody.